So just to give everyone a little bit of a heads up what's going on here, let me preface this webinar. When I moved from Portland to Nebraska a few weeks ago, I went on a road trip with my sister, Greta, that's her right there. And we drove from Portland pretty much through a few of the different states, through some national parks, and onto Nebraska. And I thought it would be fun for this webinar to kind of just edit some photos now that I really haven't touched. For the most part, I just kind of went through and I was like, okay, these could be cool photos to edit live in a way. And so that's kind of the crux or the premise of this webinar. These are basically photos that we're going to edit together. And we're going to touch on some different techniques like compositing multiple photos, doing sky replacements, and then, of course, my favorite, which is just general editing, post-processing. Now, as you can see here, this is ON1 Photo Raw 2017. What you can see is that this is a beta build of a version that will be coming out soon. I can't go into too many details about what's coming with it, but I will say that things like browse, which is what you would expect with just kind of looking through images, is lightning fast. Now, these are massive images, and I'm really happy to see that. And then another feature that was built in specifically at my request, which I appreciate the ON1 engineers doing, is with cloud photos, being able to do motion blurs, more effective motion blurs, which I'll show you in a minute. So with that, let's just go ahead. I want to start working on this composite here, because this is probably going to take the longest amount of time. This is my sister, Greta, and we were walking to an area near Missoula, Montana called the Garden of 1,000 Buddhas. And you can just do a Google search and see what it is. It's absolutely wonderful. And we saw these dandelions. And so I was testing out this Zeiss lens. And I wanted to see, the shallow depth of field. I wanted to see her kind of blow the dandelion so that the petals would fly out. And as you can kind of see over the course of a few seconds, there were just a bunch of different petals coming off of it. And there's no one good kind of petal or one good shot. So what I thought about doing was I'm just going to use layers as part of ON1 Photo Raw to combine them together. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take these 5 photos, and then on the right here, I'm going to select layers. And you're going to get this dialog box. It basically says, there are 5 photos. Do you want to work on them all? I do. And then I'm just going to select Add as Layer. And Mo, tell me if you see any comments if things are going too fast or if the screen is kind of not pacing with what I'm describing. I want to make sure everyone gets.
Definitely.
Cool.
Will do.
Thank you, Mo. So let's close this out here, get more real estate. So what you can see here are the 5 photos that I just selected, and they're stacked together on one document. And we can kind of turn them off from the top down. Now, here's how I work. This is there's no right or wrong here. This is kind of however you typically work. Take pieces of what I do, and if it works into your workflow, great. First thing I want to do, though, is find the kind of baseline, the bottommost layer. And this is it right here. It's at the bottom here. That's just kind of a coincidence, but I like the way my sister is positioned, and you have this really nice grouping of petals off of the dandelion. So this will be, for the most part, our base layer. The next thing I'm going to do is look at the additional layers and see which one would make sense to follow. And so for me, this one right here, the 3rd layer, would make sense to be the next one to mask. So what I'm going to do is just drag it right above the base layer here. All right, now watch. Do you see how as I turn that layer on and off, there's a little bit of motion? If you're going to mask multiple layers together, the first thing you want to make sure of is that the layers are aligned, that they kind of fit. And there's a really great way to do that. Right here, above the layers themselves, is a blending dropdown. And there's a particular blending mode called difference. And what difference does is it'll take the active 2 layers, the layer and the layer below it, and it'll show you in this really interesting, funky display whether there's consistency or there's an overlap between multiple layers. So watch, when I drag around, actually I have to select the move tool first. When I drag around, you can kind of see the 2 layers verging. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to kind of align off of this pole right here, because this pole will mean that the horizon will be level as well. The way you know that you're aligned is when things go completely black. You see how things like over here are completely black? That means that we are aligned. The two layers are, when I start masking, there should be no break or minimal break in the horizon. And then I just see here a question that Mo gave me from Robert, that I'm working with JPEG files. Were these directly from your camera or created outside the camera? So no, these are JPEG files created directly from the original RAW to work with, mostly just to speed things up. I use, if you look at the info, I use a Sony A7R Mark II. In this case here, I was shooting with a Zeiss Milvus 35mm f1.4, and I used a Samsung, I believe, adapter. I believe it was a Samsung adapter. No, I think it was Samsung. I can't remember what the adapter is, but it was a Canon. It was a Canon Zeiss lens adapted to the Sony E mount or FE mount, and those 40 plus megapixel images are massive. And I just wanted to kind of show you with speed how to edit. So these were exported out as JPEGs from the original RAW file at 3000 pixel wide, 72 ppi. But totally fair question. All right, so here we have the two images. First thing I'm going to do now, so just to recap, what we've done is we've aligned the two images. I'm going to take that second layer and put it below the base. So now we have the base layer, and make sure you select that layer, because now we're going to start masking. So the masking brush is right here, and there's nothing really to this. I don't need to use a perfect brush. I don't need to do anything. What I'm going to do is turn the layer on and off. And I'm going to look and note and pay attention to where there are differences. So primarily there are differences over here. So I'm going to go here, and then you can see how I'm just drawing those extra petals. And so it's looking like there's even more stuff. And if you see here how I accidentally got rid of some of that from the original base layer, you could do one of two things. You can either hit Command or Control Z if you're on a Windows to undo, or you can kind of hit X, and that will change the brush from paint out to paint back in, and it'll restore that information. And so now as you start doing your masks, you just kind of turn the layer on and off, and you see, all right, is there anything else that you can kind of paint back in? And I'm just doing single clicks with my trackpad right now. I'm not using my pen. I'm not doing anything like that. I'm just kind of like clicking through. So in this here, I've basically got, I would say, what I want from that bottom layer. Like there's some stuff down here, but I don't need that right now. So with these two layers visible, what I'm going to do is I want to combine them. Now I want to take these two layers and I want to make a new layer out of that. So if you go to the layer menu and then you go to new stamped layer, what that's going to do is it's going to take those visible layers, and you can see here I have a third layer. If I turn the bottom two layers off, or if I say I want to conserve file size, I can delete the layers. It doesn't matter, because I've taken that information and I've got it here in this new layer. And that's just something to remember. The more layers you have in an active document, the larger the file is going to be, and the more resource intensive it could be. It's just the way it is. All right, so now this is my new base layer. I'm going to turn on another layer, and I'm going to start seeing, is there a better one now for right there? This one right here is the next layer. So repeat the process. Place that layer above your base layer, and then make sure it's selected, that active layer, and change the blending mode to difference. Now we'll take the move tool again and just kind of see how as I move around, you can see the differences between the layers. And in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and again blend until it's black. So right now it's black. That means I know that when I go back to normal, this pole and the horizon surrounding it are aligned, so that when I start masking, it's not going to look weird. All right, so let's go ahead here. I'm going to take this layer, put it below the base layer just like before, select that layer here, and then let's get the masking brush, and we'll turn the layers on and off. So you can see here most of the interesting stuff is right here below the bulb. So turn it back on and just start bringing more petals in. So you see what I'm doing here is like I'm trying to just bring in a bunch of those petals. And I could see here there's a little bit of, I don't know what that is, but I'm just going to go ahead. It probably was from a mask that I did. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that when it's done. I just wanted to point that out. So let's keep turning this on and off. All right, let's go back to the masking brush. And so all you're doing is you're just selecting, all right, here there's something. Let me go and remove that there. So that was able to remove that. And it's, you know, it depends on how much you want to bring in. I'm going to ignore these two right here, but I'm just going to go and bring that one. Oops, painting. There we go. And that one. All right. So you can see now it's just looking like there's a ton of petals. So take the layer. We'll go ahead and create a new stamped layer. And I'm just going to do one more because I don't want you. I hope you're getting the idea of what's going on here. We're going to take a fourth layer and see. I think this one looks pretty good. Yeah. So turn this on. Change the blending mode to difference. Grab the move tool and align until it's black. When the area that you're interested in is pretty much black, you can rest assured that it's aligned properly so that when you mask, it's going to be seamless. But don't forget, after you change it to difference, to change it back to normal. Because if you don't do that, it's going to look weird. So take that layer, put it below the base layer, select the base layer, and then back with the masking brush. And so we just kind of turn on and off. So there's some stuff here, like in the background. And you can see how now I'm starting to mask some of my sister's hand from the previous layer. So all you do is press X, or you can go up here from paint out to paint in and remove that. And of course, I'm using a pretty big brush. So just kind of looking around here, and I keep toggling it on and off to see if there are other little kind of petals. Over here, there should be some. And you want to make sure that you're kind of not getting too close to the stem right there. And that's good. I would say for now, that's good. You know, it looks like an explosion of petals. And compared to what it was originally, I think it's pretty good. So, all right, let's just do this. Let's go ahead. We'll do a composite or a stamp layer, delete those. And then now we're done. So now we can save if you want. And it'll create a Photoshop PSD file. But what I want to do now is stylize. So first thing I'm going to do is go into develop just to show you some stuff. And then I actually want to see what happens if I use this perfect eraser on this pole. Now that we were done technically, I want to see, I haven't tried this yet. Remember, this is all kind of, I'm just playing around right now. But I want to see if I could remove that. Nice job. A little here needs a little bit of refinement, but for the most part, did a pretty nice job. So that pole's gone, and then I'm going to just draw some more strokes over the seams to blend it out. But with this now, I'm going to open up my histogram. Histogram is one of those things that should always be visible if you're editing a photo because it shows you the tone of your photo. It shows you if you're blowing out any of your highlights or you're clipping any of your shadows. But in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up the exposure a bit. And I'm also going to go ahead and add a little bit of contrast and open up the highlights even more because I want this to be a really bright, fun image. As far as temperature goes, I'm not going to try to get a custom white balance because this is a JPEG photo. If this was a RAW photo, then I would definitely get a custom white balance. But in this case here, I'm just going to warm it up overall a little bit and hit done. So what happens now is we're back in layers. And let's say this is a photo that I want to share on Instagram. So in this case, I'm going to go to the crop tool and I'm going to change the perspective from freeform to square, which is 1:1. And you can see it snaps to a square. And now what I can do is just kind of reframe it right around there and then hit apply. And to me, this is a more effective composition. The dandelion's more in the center. You have all of the space around here. And I'm going to go ahead and go to effects. Now, before I go into effects though, I'm going to convert this into a smart layer. And you do that by clicking on this gear. Now, the reason why I'm converting it now to a smart layer and not before I cropped is because when you activate a smart layer, you lose the ability to do crops and stuff like that. So if you need to crop or rotate your image, you can turn that off and you'll see that you have these tools available to you. But in this case here, I'm going to hit the gear. I don't need to crop anymore. I just saw a question, what's the difference between creating a stamped layer versus merging two layers? Totally fair question. The difference is, let's say I create a duplicate layer here and I merge them together. So I go to layer and I go to merge layers. It'll take those layers and it merges them together into one. But let's say I have a bunch of different layers and I've done some custom masks to them, different things to them, and I don't want to actually merge them, but I want to combine them. That's where the stamped layer comes in. So if I click on new stamped layer, you see how it creates a third layer and it keeps the remaining two. So that's the primary difference. Merging will take them and actually kind of smash them together, and you are resulted with one, or you're left with one layer. But with stamping, it just takes the visible layers and creates a new one. So you can always go back to those original layers if you wanted to. All right, so now, again, I'm turning this into a smart layer. And the reason why I want to do that is because when you turn a layer into smart layer, let's say I go into effects right now. Anything I do in effects, I can go back later on when the layer is a smart layer and I can re-edit. So it's not totally baked in, which is a huge, huge boost. So here, just going to do some mild thing, not mild, but I'm not going to do too much to it. I know when I look at this photo, it kind of gives me that vintage feel. And so I added a filter. And notice how I don't have the presets bars here. I like to build my images from scratch using the filters. I shouldn't say never, but I would say 98% of the time when you see a photo of mine from ON1 Photo Raw, it's using, and from effects, for example, or from develop, it's using hand-built, custom-built filters. So here, I usually kind of scroll through. Iris looks really nice. I just want to see if there's something that oatmeal is also kind of cool. I want to see if there's one in particular that stands out. So for me, it's between cool and oatmeal. I'm going to stick with cool. So, because this gives it that kind of desaturated, vintagey look, I'm going to bring the saturation out a little bit more, and that's looking pretty cool. So I'm going to add a filter, and now I'm going to add Where's Sunshine. I love Sunshine. To me, Sunshine's like one of the best filters in the entire effects product. So here, you can see if I turn it off and on, this does a really nice job. But I don't like how the actual bulb of the dandelion is just kind of blown out. So I'm going to take a masking brush here and drop it down and just kind of mask it out a little bit. And if you don't like the way it looks, if the mask is too sloppy, you can undo that, go to the gear up here, and then select Perfect Brush. And what that'll do is that'll actually just sample whatever the color is, so it won't bleed out there. So that's a much, much cleaner mask. And you can go ahead here and just like select those little guys right there, just to bring a little bit back some of that tonality. And if it's too strong, we can undo this. We could drop the opacity of the brush, so it's not, the mask doesn't totally punch out the sunshine effect. It just restores a little bit of the vintage. So, it's all about kind of like making a change, looking at it, and then knowing that if it needs to be adjusted, knowing that you can adjust it. So we'll go on here, and I think there'll be two more. I'm going to add what did I want to add? I knew I wanted to add something here. What is it? A flare. There it is, lens flare. And here, this is kind of like, I kind of like this, but it's way too strong. So I'm going to take the opacity of this filter, bring it down just a little bit. And you see kind of how it's adding that kind of fun, whimsical feeling Kind of like that to me is what I'm trying to go for here. And then the last thing is a vignette because I want to draw the eye more towards the dandelion. So I'm going to select Big Softy, and it's a bit too dark for the edges, so I'm going to open that up a little bit. And then I want to make sure that the center of the vignette kind of goes right around here. And so there's this really cool little reticle right here. And if I click anywhere in the image, it's going to move the center point of the vignette to that area. Because normally a vignette darkens the edges of the frame evenly towards the center. But I want to kind of bias or skew the center more towards my sister's face and the dandelion. So that did that. So you can see here, if we kind of turn this off and then back on, just looks like a really nice, fun image. And when I hit done, what will happen is it'll bring the photo back into layers. But you can see here, because I turned it on, I turned smart layers on before, this is important, before I went into effects, you can see this line item here. So I can turn that off, or I can go in, if I double click it, it'll bring me into effects at any given time in the future, and I have access to the exact settings that I made. So I highly recommend, usually what my workflow is, I do the cropping first, then I'll turn it into a smart layer. I'll go into develop. I forgot to do it in this case here with develop. If I go to develop now, and let's say I want to open up the exposure just a little bit more, and let's say I want to add a little bit of structure. When I click done, where is my develop? Oh, it's over here, develop and effects. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. So now if I remember correctly, there used to be multiple line items. So now they're both of them. So if I go here into develop, you can see that the changes are made already. Whew, I got scared for a second. I was like, where did they go? But they're just combined into one. All right, so that is kind of the compositing side of things. And even though we had that little flub where it bombed out, the technique, the steps that you need to take are always the same. Take your layers, use a difference blending mode, and then you can kind of make sure that everything's aligned, and then you start masking. All right, so this is the compositing thing. Now I want to go ahead, let's go to this photo of Mount Rushmore. So I went with my sister here. Neither of us, obviously we knew what Mount Rushmore was. We've seen photos of this a bazillion times growing up, but I can tell you with some certainty that I don't think either of us ever in our lifetimes thought we would be here to see it in person. So it was kind of cool. The only problem was that was this really, really boring blue sky. Fortunately though, we don't have to worry about that because there's some really cool masking tools in ON1 Photo Raw, and we're going to use them right now. So this is how we're going to do things. I'm actually working on something. I don't want to go into too many details, but Mo and I were talking about this yesterday about a very cool product that I'm going to be building out, and I'm going to be partnering with ON1 on, and it's going to be all about these big skies and overlays, and just kind of really, it's going to be very cool. And I want to tease it a little bit, but know that there's going to be some really interesting stuff coming in terms of sky replacement techniques, blending and stuff like that. So I want to give you a little bit of a peek. So here's a photo of some clouds that I took, and I love, in particular, I really enjoy these kinds of skies where you have a combination of blue, and then you have a defined cloud, and you also have some wispy clouds. To me, this is a really effective cloud photo because you can always, especially if you take it at a high resolution, as I did in this case with a 42 megapixel sensor, you can crop in. If I just want more of the detailed clouds, I have that. So let's go ahead here. I'm going to select these two photos from Browse. And just like before when I selected the 5 photos of my sister, I'm going to select layers so that I can add them onto one document as layers. So here it's taking those 2 photos and putting them right here. Oh, let me remove this photo of my sister. Cool. Actually, let me close this. Don't save. I never closed out that original document, which is why it came back like that. So here, we'll do this again. We'll go to layers, add as layer, and now it should just be a normal working document. Cool. All right. So let's start here first. We'll put, zoom in here. All right. So what we're going to start with first is this photo of Mount Rushmore. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and just crop this so that we don't have excess. The reason why you're seeing this excess is because the cloud layer is a much higher resolution than the Mount Rushmore. So with this going, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take, we want to remove the blue sky, right? So I'm going to go ahead and actually, let me crop this. Original ratio, bring this down because all that extra space is bothering me. Perfect. Apply. There we go. All right. So we're going to remove the sky. And to do that, it's actually pretty straightforward. This area here will be very easy. You start getting into troubles when you get through trees and stuff because there's all of these shapes. So to do this, I'm going to take my masking brush, which is right here on the left, and I'm going to select from the gear the perfect brush. And what the perfect brush does, like I mentioned before, is it samples whatever the color is when you first click the mouse or your pen. And here you can see how it's basically just getting rid of the sky. And so I'm going to focus on this first. And this is very easy. There's really nothing here that is complicated. Just going to get rid of this and make sure I get close here. And so we're good here, right? Everything looks good here. We'll deal with the actual little pixel edge in a second. But now we have to get through here. So to do that, this is how I do it. If you press and hold the Command key on a Mac or the Control key on Windows, so first I'm doing that. What I'm first doing is I'm pressing the Command key. I haven't even started drawing yet. I'm just moving around. With that, I can start drawing, and what it's going to do is it's going to keep that original color in memory. Normally, watch what happens. If I take my perfect brush and I click right here in the sky and then I go down, the brush starts sampling whatever color you're drawing on. So that's why it started sampling the stone color and it's removing it. But we don't want that. I want the perfect brush to always remember blue. The way it'll do that is if you press and hold Command or Control first and then click, and you can see here how I can draw through and it's going to get rid of that stuff. And if you want to refine it, just let go of your pen and the Command key, move to a new area, a different shade of blue with a smaller brush, like right there. Press and hold the Option or the Command key, and it'll refine the selection. Now, you might see that there's some areas here that there might have been some contamination with the blue. That's not a problem, because all I do here with the perfect brush selected, I change my mode from paint out to paint in, and I just do these quick clicks. And you can see how it's restoring the bristles. You know, I know people kind of freak out with trees and stuff, but all you have to do is just kind of find those affected areas. Because with the perfect brush on, it's still sampling, in this case, the green and the brown. But we have this, if you look, let me zoom in here. You can see we still have this edge. And you can keep refining it. But there's a cool trick, actually, that I want to show you. You see this chisel right here. It's called the chisel mask tool. What this does is when you draw, I'm not drawing anything, I just want to illustrate. It basically shaves off 1 pixel on the edge of the mask. So the edge of our mask is right here. But I don't want to draw through everything. I just wanted to apply or shave off a pixel edge evenly across the entire mask. So all you have to do is double click on this tool. And I don't know if you saw that, it was super quick. I'm going to undo it. I'm going to double click here. And it just shaves off a pixel edge. Now, if you don't want that, go ahead and just, with the pen, all I'm doing here is going across Rushmore, you like the top of the mountain, and through here. And with that, we now have the mask. And it's a clean mask because let's turn this composite back on. Now you can see here, you know, it's a huge layer. And if I zoom out and select the move tool, you can see that basically if I move it around, I can control which part of the sky I want. So here, let's go ahead and fit the cloud right there. And that's looking good. We'll turn the move off and I'm gonna zoom in. The clouds right here, they look fine. Everything matches. It was really important that if you're blending skies, you want to blend in a sky that has the same kind of tone, general color and light as your main image. But let's say you want, let's bring this to a different, let's pretend like we had a long exposure here. So I'm going to take this composite here and I'm going to select smart layer. I'm going to make it a smart layer and I'm going to go into effects. And this is going to be very straightforward. One basic filter. I'm going to go to add filter and then I'm going to go to blur and I'm going to select motion. Now this is one of the changes I mentioned at the beginning of the program that was made in this beta build that will be released soon. Originally, if you go right now to your build of ON1 Photo Raw and you take your distance slider and you bring it to the max, your effect will only be about this. It wasn't strong enough. So I asked the engineers if they can make it stronger. So now, if we bring it to 500, this looks like a long exposure. I mean, it looks really good. So we can change that. I'm going to keep it at max. If you want to change the angle so you can make it look like this, the clouds are kind of going upward, we can do that. And now I'm going to go and select done. And because we made a smart layer, I can always go back. Let's say it's too strong. We can go back and just adjust it. But now what I'm going to do is I want to brighten this up, just the sky layer. So I'm going to go into develop. And I'm going to open up the exposure a little bit. I'm going to bring out the highlights. And I'm going to also make it a little bit more color saturated. Something like that. Now hit done. And again, because we're working on the cloud layer, only the clouds are being affected. The rest of the image is not. Now though, if we want to start working on the whole image, we can go and create, and this goes back to the question that came before. If I merge the layers, those two layers are gone. But if I create a new stamped layer, oops, I forgot one thing. When you create your stamped layer, you want your top layer to be selected. And so I'm going to go here and create a new stamped layer. There is our composite. You can see I can turn these two off and I have a new layer to work on. One of the only reasons why you would want to work on these layers individually is, let's say I go back here and I refine the mask. That refinement or that change will not be reflected in your stamped layer. So you'd have to create a new stamped layer, if that makes sense. But here we'll go ahead, let's go to effects. Let's go, oh, actually I forgot, I have to crop this. Let's go here. I'm just gonna crop this really quickly, guys. And go to effects, there. All right, now, first thing I'm gonna do is add by far my favorite filter, which is a dynamic contrast, and I do this the same time, same way, every single time. I go to these three sliders here, small, medium, and large, and I just change them to 9. And then I change the opacity to 50%. That is, to me, this is 999 at 50% for dynamic contrast is like the magic setting. This is what I always do. And if you want, you can always mask out from the sky because there's no reason to have dynamic contrast in your sky, especially when it's smooth. So I'm just going ahead here and I'm drawing through, and you can see the sky, the mask over here, except this time I'm going to change my opacity to 100. and just draw through. And because I turned on the perfect brush, it's not affecting the mountain itself, which is where I want the effect to apply. Now let's go ahead here. Excuse me. For this, I'm going to go and I'm going to try a bleach bypass. And what that does is it adds this kind of really contrasty, strong shadow effect. But I always recommend kind of going through here and highlighting all of the options, because there's sometimes something really cool. Like here, I kind of like high key warm, but I'm going to bring that down a little bit. It's a bit too strong. Now let's hit add filter, and I'm going to add a glow with normal. Way too strong. Way too strong. So let's bring this to 0 and just add just a little bit right there. And then the last thing I'll add is a vignette. Now in this case here, I'm okay with the center of the vignette being in the center of the frame. So let's just add subtle. It's a bit too subtle for me, so I'm going to bring that down. And let's look at the before and the after. This, to me, I like this. I think it brings out the natural qualities of the scene. And so we can hit done. Hey Mo, are there any questions? Anything that I can address?
Doesn't look like it right now. I'd say keep going.
Cool. So with that, we're done. We saved. We created the composite, and everything's good there. So let's go ahead here, and I'm going to edit this photo again of my sister. And like I mentioned before, this was taken at the Garden of 1,000 Buddhas, and it's in a tiny little town of Arley, Montana. And Arley is about, I would say, 30 minutes outside of Missoula, which was probably the biggest town in that area. So you can see here, it took this photo. This was handheld. If I look at the info, Sony a7R II. This was taken with the 24-70 2.8 GM lens. And whenever I handhold, this is why I hardly ever handhold. I can never get my camera straight. So let's go ahead here. Let's open this up as layers. Actually, let me go back to layers and close this document. Or I'll start a new document. Never mind. All right. So with this here, I'm going to go. First thing I want to do is kind of rotate that canvas, because you can see this horizontal line is slightly off center. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate that just a little bit so that it's straight. Somewhere right around there. And click apply. All right. Then let's go ahead here. I'm going to select this as a square. Bring it down a bit. Bring it up a bit. Because I always kind of have Instagram on the brain these days. All right. So there we go. That is the kind of square crop. If it's framed really nicely. If anything, let me bring this in a little bit. There. What I'm trying to do is get my sister in the center of the frame, and we have this rule of thirds grid right here, which gives me a nice guide. All right, so next thing I want to do is kind of get rid of this. I don't know what that is, like a flower petal or something. So I'm going to use the perfect erase brush, and I'm going to see what it can do here. Beautiful. Got rid of it. Everything's good. So that to me was a distraction, and I just noticed that my sister has a giant dandelion there. So cool, everything's good here. For the most part now, let's go into develop. Actually, first thing we're going to do is turn this into a smart layer, because I'm done with my cropping and rotation, and I want to make sure that I retain the settings that I make here for any photo. So I'm going to go to develop, and with the histogram open, remember you want your histogram open. Because watch, if I bring out the exposure and I click on the disclosure triangles right here on the histogram, it's going to show me wherever I am blowing out highlights or clipping shadows. So I can just bring this down, and you can see that as my tonality is restored, that warning goes away. And I can also drop the highlights, because that's mostly what's affecting the histogram right now. Just remember you can turn it off if you don't want to see those warnings anymore. So now I'm going to go ahead here. I'm going to warm this up a little bit. I'm going to add some shadows, drop the black point a little bit, just give it a little bit more of a contrast boost. And then for there, you can see, let's just do the before and the after. See how it kind of opens up a bit? I might open up the exposure just a bit more, make it really bright, and then add a vibrance boost. So now let's look at the before and the after. Good. And this is, in my opinion, this is how you're supposed to use develop. Develop is kind of like cleaning up your image, you know, fixing tonality, sharpness, that kind of stuff, and color. With that, you know, you can click done, or you can just switch straight to effects. I always like to go back. And now here's where, if you want to add some stylization, you can do that. So I'm going to select add filter, and just like before, dynamic contrast, 999 and 50%. But I do not want dynamic contrast applied to my sister. Like, to me, dynamic contrast on skin is a big mistake. So I'm going to go ahead to the masking brush. I'm going to select the perfect brush, and then I'm just going to, with a really small brush, just kind of paint out that effect from pretty much anywhere there's skin, because you don't want skin to be crispy. That's kind of gross. And you can see here, really small little mask preview there. So it just kind of shows you that, yeah, okay, we're masked out. That's all good. Let me get her leg too. But as far as like the clothing, I'm okay with that to a degree, because the clothing has texture, natural texture to it. Now I'm going to go ahead and, just like I did in the very first image when of my sister blowing the dandelion, I'm going to add sunshine. And I think sunshine's a really nice filter. And again, just go through these presets. So like radiance and strong, both are really cool. But you know what? That sun glow is kind of nice too. I'm going to go with strong, and I'm going to drop the opacity just a little bit. All right, cool. Now let's add filter. And now what I'm going to do is add another one of those lens flares, except not the one that we used before. I'm going to go to this upright, and I'm going to drop that to 0 and only add, you see, here's the thing. Some of these filters, and I used to say this all the time when I worked at ON1. Imagine, let's turn this off for a second. You add filter and you're like, oh, what's a lens flare? And you add it, and it's like, oh, that's kind of weird. Let me click it. And it's like, whoa, this is ruining my photo. And yes, in this case here, I would agree that this is pretty much ruining your photo. But that's because the effect comes in at 100%. The filter comes in at 100%. And I used to be against this a lot. In fact, I remember having arguments with our chief product manager where we should bring filters in at 50%. But over time, I realized that was wrong, because at 50%, you might not really understand or see what that full effect is of what you're doing to your photo. So what's important, and what, you know, a lesson I always try to share with anyone who wants to listen or watch, is take that opacity slider, bring it to 0, and just, you know, there's nothing that says, even if you apply a filter at, say, 10%, that's okay. There's an art to subtlety. So here I'm just gonna, until I start to see that effect, and then I'm gonna take that masking brush, because I like what it's doing to the base of the photo here. And then I'm gonna take the masking brush again. We'll take the opacity down to 50% just for the brush, and turn on perfect brush, and just kind of remove the effect from her, because I don't want that kind of yellowish green cast too much on her. So there, that's good. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll add one more filter here. And anyone who watched my webinars or my videos on ON1 knows one of my favorite textures in all of the world is, if you go and add textures, you go into the categories of paper, and then the texture itself is called rice paper light. I love this texture so much. And you can see I can scale in and out. I'm going to scale in and out so you can kind of see the paper breathe. So if you look over here and over here on the edges of the frame, you'll see that there's a border. See how it gets darker? So I don't like that. I always scale out until that border disappears. And then what I'm going to do is click on the gear icon, which is next to the delete icon. It opens up some more options. And I'm going to start checking out different blending modes. So multiply is pretty cool, but usually overlay or soft light in this case looks pretty cool. So I'm going to drop that down right there, 28%. Last filter, because it's really bright around the edges, is another vignette. We'll go to Big Softy, open it up just a bit, bring the so the size slider controls how close to the center the vignette appears. So I'm going to go right around here, just outside of it hitting my sister, and I'm going to call this good. You can see, let's go to the before and the after. So before, after, if we had done, to me, this is kind of like, it really speaks. This is without any develop or effects changes made. And then, to me, this has that vibe, that really cool vibe. So hit save, and then we can go back to browse. So, Mo, how are we doing on time? I think we're getting kind of close, but I want to know if I have time to edit any more photos.
Yeah, the webinar is scheduled to run until 10:30, and I would like to open it up to Q&A. For those of you asking, this will be recorded and it will be posted on our blog under a recorded webinars section. But if you do have questions for Brian, for me, go ahead and use that questions box. They're coming in pretty light right now, so if you want to keep editing, Brian, go ahead.
Sure. All right, so this was taken also near the Garden of a Thousand Buddhas. It was just this one tiny little barn in this massive field, and there was just something that appealed to me. And so what I'm going to do here is start working on the photo. We'll open this up in layers as a new photo. And like I always said, the way I start with the kind of crop tool. Don't apply that. Move tool, let's go ahead here and resize or straighten it rather. I typically like to, for me, it's all about keeping lines straight. And so I'm kind of going off of these vertical lines of the barn. Actually, cancel out of here for a second. I was in the wrong tool. Crop tool. There we go. And there's my rotate. Let's go ahead here. So what I'm doing is you see this grid that appears. That grid is there for a very particular reason. That's to help guide you. So I'm looking at the vertical lines of the grid, and I'm kind of basing them off of the vertical lines of the barn, stopping to where it looks good, and then I'll click apply. And so with that, we've gone ahead and straightened things. In terms of the crop and composition, I like it. I like the fact that I use a really shallow depth of field. This is what, a f1.4. So I focused it to the background for the barn, and there were a bunch of these kind of reeds in the foreground, so they kind of take on this in the foreground bokeh area. It just kind of looks really nice in the fact that it fills the frame here. So now with that, let's convert this to a smart layer, which again, really important. If you're using ON1 Photo Raw and you're not using smart layers, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're leaving a big feature on the table there. Just remember, you want to do your rotations, your crops, any sort of healing or mask or refining, like basically these tools here. You'll want to do that, any cloning first, because once you turn the layer on as a smart layer, you lose that ability. But if you want to do that, just turn it off, and you see that you have that ability now to kind of heal things and crop. All right, so let's jump into develop here. And this is, again, the kind of workflow. First thing I do is I fix color, I fix tone, and then I move on to the stylization. I don't recommend stylizing first, because you want to give yourself a nice, even baseline, correct photo. So here you can see it's kind of flat. It was overcast, which in a way is great because you don't have to deal with hard shadows and spotted light. But at the same time, it could use a little bit of a contrast boost. So I'm going to go ahead here and open this up, the exposure a little bit, add some contrast, add a little bit of highlights, and then I'm also going to drop the shadows, drop the black point. Someone's asking about the grid, how that happens. I'll show you that in a second. So let's hit done. Actually, I'll just cancel out. I'll do this again. I'll do the effects again. All right, so let's turn this off. The grid, the question was how I got that grid. When you go to crop and you hover your cursor until you get the rotate icon. If you look there, it's a circle, an arrow going in a circle. When you click, that grid appears. And then there's a question if there are straightening tools or vertical horizontal adjustment as there are in Lightroom. Actually, I'm not sure. I know that there is a lens correction, but Mo, I've never used the, I haven't seen any. So if there is, let me know. But now
a level tool at the top there.
Oh yeah, sorry, there is. So here, I went here to this little level icon, and what I'm going to do is drag against a horizontal line. So what I'm doing here is I'm dragging against the top of this little barn. I totally missed that, Mo. And let go. And what it does is it straightens it off of that horizontal line. Cool. Thanks, Mo.
I got your back, Brian.
That's the way it works. Now we have it straight. Actually, it looks straighter than it was before. So even better. I'm going to select and turn this into a smart layer. Go to develop, and I was going to make those edits really quickly again. Open up the exposure. Let's see, add contrast. Open up the highlights, and then let's add a little bit of shadow and drop the black point. So watch. See how it just before and after, it's kind of flat, and here it kind of pops out a bit. We can also add overall saturation. I can also warm the image up a bit, and then add a little bit of structure. So before and after. Again, all I'm doing here is just kind of correcting the photo if that's what you want it, if that's how you want to take it. Not really doing anything with stylization. If anything, you can argue that the most stylization I did here was adjusting the temperature and saturation sliders, because the temperature does affect the temperature of the photo, the warmth, or how warm or how cool it is, and the saturation adds more presence of color. So with that, though, I will jump straight into effects, because now it's time to have some fun. All right, so again, I mentioned before, I don't really use presets, just kind of the way it is. When I do, though, like Hipster is one of my favorites, and like there are some really cool options. I'm not trying to discourage. Like this Holga color looks awesome. And the thing, if you are going to use presets, one thing that I would like to encourage is don't take any at face value. So let's just stick with this Holga, for example. I'm going to hide the preset bar. What do I like about this? I love just the overall look in the middle of the frame. What don't I like about it? Well, I don't like the blur. You can kind of see this radial blur that's happening, and I could see right there. There's the that filter that's part of this preset. So what I mean by don't take things at face value, when you apply a preset, don't just, listen, your photo, your rules. For me, I take a preset if I use one, and I use it as a very, very rough kind of recommendation. So for instance, blur here, way too strong. It's this radial blur. Let's turn it off. Like, okay, that's looking pretty good. Like if you want a normal blur, for example, then just drop that opacity if you need it. But to me personally, I don't need the blur. So you can either turn it off or you can delete it. And so what I'm getting at here is I'm making this preset my own. So I like this. Overall, everything looks good here. I might add a little bit more of this brightness. Kind of see, look at the barn, and the reason why is because it's using it has the red color selected, so I can make the barn brighter or darker, or basically it's affecting, I guess, anything with the red channel. And then I can go here to with the color picker, select here. Let's go and select orange. Make the orange more or less saturated, so you can kind of really refine where, like, what changes you want to make, what color range, using the color enhancer. Vignette. So vignette. Here's the thing. This vignette, if I turn off, this is kind of a. Are there multiple? Oh, there are multiple vignettes. Okay. That's kind of the style of a Holga camera. So it's okay to keep it. But let's say you want it to be more closer to the edge. You can do that. Or if it's too bright or too dark rather, you can open that up a bit. It really, the point here is that you want to make it your own. Like, don't just apply a preset and walk away. And then, for instance, here, just because you have those presets doesn't mean that you can't add more. So, like for me, again, there's no dynamic contrast, which is a sin. Going to go here, add 999, bring it to 50%. And then what I'm going to do is add a mask, and I'm going to invert it. So just in case you didn't catch that, next to every filter, there's a little plus icon next to the toggle to turn that layer on and off. If you click it, that adds a mask. And what I'm going to do is hit invert. What invert does is it hides the entire effect. So I want the dynamic contrast only to apply kind of to the barn and to the surrounding area here. So with my masking brush, what I'm going to do is I'm in paint in right here. I'm going to bring the opacity to 100%, and I'm just going to draw. And you can see as I draw, the mask updates. I don't want that dynamic contrast in the out of focus area because I don't want to make that out of focus area too crispy. I want whatever's in focus, whatever's sharp, to have that effect. So that's looking good here. I'll hit add, and maybe I'll add, say, that sunshine filter again. And let's say I want the sunshine filter to apply just to that foreground. I can go back to the dynamic contrast filter here, select copy, add the mask, paste the mask. I have to invert it and then paste it there. And so there's the mask here, and you can see. You see, and now what I have to do is take my masking brush and refine it. So something like that. And then I can go ahead, select the perfect brush, and remove it from the sky. Actually does a really nice job. If Dan's on here, high five, Dan. Perfect brush has come such a long way. So you can see here what we did. And if you turn the global opacity off, we went from this to that. Actually, that feature request. You should build an animation that builds the effect instead of this kind of like on, off. Feature request. Think about it.
I will make sure that Dan gets that right on his desk.
Thank you. So here's the final point to this, though, guys. You did this. You took the Holga preset. You made your changes, and might as well save that. So you want to save that as a preset. Don't forget that you can save that, so that you can always apply it later on. It's just one of those things that, excuse me, where if you've like I said, you've made it your own. So if you want to update the Holga preset, the stock Holga preset, you can do that with the update preset. But I don't want to update because Dan worked so hard building all these presets. You don't want to offend him or make him cry because he is a sensitive soul. But I'm going to hit save settings as preset. I'm going to go and call this even better than Dan's Holga preset. And then my presets here, I can create a new category called better than Dan's presets. Hit OK, and then hit OK. Now let's hit done. So I'll render that photo. Let's save it. Let's close these documents out, and we'll go back to browse. So let's just kind of take a photo like this tractor here, and let's just bring it straight into effects. If I open up my presets and I go to better than Dan's presets, which is the category I just created, I now have my Holga presets here. And just like before, like, oh man, some of these things are way too strong, so I can go ahead and refine them. Like this color enhancer is a bit too strong. And so there you go. It's just like one of those things. Now, I see a question here. Can you go over why you keep going back to layers? Yes. So is this to make a smart layer so it's non-destructive? You keep going into layers quickly. Yeah, sorry about that if I was doing that. Normally I do go into layers, and mostly because in a lot of cases I'm working with multiple images, or multiple images on a layer, on their own layers. But I also like to go into layers to, in this case here, I already made my edits. But I would create my smart layers. That's basically why. It's everyone, like I said at the beginning, some of the things that I do may fit into your workflow. Some of them may not, but I mean, I've been using layers. I remember when layers was released years ago. So it's just one of those things. And when all the modules kind of came together into ON1 Photo Raw, that's just how I do things. I go into browse here, and I find the photos I want to work on, and then I bring them in and into layers, and I work on them from there. And you can see just this little gear icon here. So if I go into layers, oh, sorry, that messed up. Anyway, but my point is that's kind of why I do it, is so that I could always go back, and if I need to refine something, that's why. So I hope that answers the question, and it's not probably the most satisfying answer, but that is why I go into layers. I have my kind of routine set. Mo, anything else? If not, I can do one more sky swap.
There are a few questions actually about skies, white balance. A question here from Dwayne. I find myself lowering the white balance and highlights on my photos to bring more tone into the sky. You know, perhaps this is a good segue for us with your next image. Is there a better process for doing white balance and highlights on his skies?
Yeah, I mean, there are. It's a totally fair question. Usually, what I'll do is like here. This is a photo I took in Central Park a little while back, and you can see here this was at sunrise. So, unfortunately, we weren't blessed with any clouds, but we have some really nice light. So I'm going to take, and then here I have this cloud that was also taken at a sunrise. When the problem that I see typically with any sort of sky swaps, there are two telltale situations. One, the mask isn't clean. Actually, there are three. Let's open these up into layers just to. Where's my sky layer? Close. Let me close all these out. I need to show, oh, they put it on its own. Okay. Go to browse. All right, so select these two. We'll go to layers, add as layer. Oh, that's why I did. I said new photo. Okay, so let's put this below here. All right, so typically the reason why skies don't work, one, the mask doesn't look good, so you can easily tell. Two, to Dwayne's point, the tone of the clouds and the color don't match up, and not just that, but the directionality of light, for example. If you're going to mask, for instance, a sky into this image, you better be sure that your photo kind of, the clouds, the quality of the light, the direction of the light matches up with the base layer. So let me explain to you what I mean by that. And then finally, the third point, and I'll go into, is in this case here, this is not always the case, but there's water, and water is reflective. So normally, you can see right now there's nothing in the sky here. There's nothing in the water. You can see the buildings are reflected. So these are kind of the telltale signs. So watch what happens. Let's go here. I'm going to do a really quick mask. I've got my masking brush. I'm going to go to the gear and turn perfect brush on. And I'm just going to go ahead and mask. And this is admittedly a very easy mask. There's, good kudos to the masking brush, the perfect brush, doing it. But it's not a terribly complicated mask, and I'm okay with that. But I'm going here, kind of masking through. Everything looks good. Let's turn on the mask preview. So just make sure that we have a nice clean mask. And what I mean by that is you see this kind of hazy area at the horizon. I want to make sure that's gone. There. Nice, really nice clean mask. So this is the first telltale sign when there's a problem with a sky swap. Let's turn that off. And I got that from down here, guys. Right at the bottom, there's a little mask preview button. All right, now we have the mask. Let's turn the sky layer on and let's position it. So select it and let's move it around somewhere around like, right around here. Okay. First thing we're going to do, let's apply this move. I'm going to go ahead and take the chisel and I'm going to remove, wrong layer. Always remember to select the right layer you want to be on to mask. And you'll know that because as soon as if you're on the wrong layer when you're masking, you click on your mouse or your pen and nothing happens. That should be the first indicator. You are on the wrong layer. So here I'm just going to kind of really quickly shave off 1 pixel of the mask just so that it blends more easily. And then also, if you want, you can select the blur mask tool, which adds a very slight blur. Usually I'll do that like on some super hard edges, but for the most part, I use it sparingly. The chisel usually does everything I need. Let's also ignore these little dust spots that I see here because Brian was a bad boy and didn't clean his photo. But I told you, these are photos that I really haven't done anything with. All right, so here, you can see that the light from the sky was coming from the right to the left. You can see the bright sun over here on the right. So it makes sense, right? This actually makes sense. Now you can go ahead. Let's say this is a bit too bright. I can go here. Let's say I want to, I'm ready. I've cropped this photo. I'm ready to commit it. I'll turn it to a smart layer and I'll go to develop. Now, because I have that, let me hide the preset bar. Because I had that sky layer selected, that's what I'm working on. So, excuse me. I'm gonna go ahead. Let's say I'll make this a little bit brighter. I'm gonna drop the highlights a bit because it's a bit too hot. And, maybe I do want to add a little bit of contrast to Dwayne's point. I could drop the black point a little bit, drop the shadows. Let's see the before and the after. Yeah, that's good. So now that I'm done, we'll return back to layers and the sky now matches a little bit more. But you can play around with this. So that's that we've taken care of points 1 and 2, meaning the mask is clean and we're adjusting the tonality of the photo. To the tonality, we're matching the clouds to the foreground. Number 3, though, is important. Number 3 is we have a body of water. And why is there a gigantic erupting cloud up here and there's nothing down here? That doesn't make any sense, especially since you see the buildings right here and you see them in the water. So what you want to do is you want to duplicate that layer. So now we have 2 of them. And because we turned it into a smart layer, we have all the changes made. And excuse me, what we want to do is remember, if we're gonna move or change a layer, meaning its resolution or its perspective, you need to turn off the smart layer. So now with that, I'm going to go to move, and then you see this button right here. It says flip vertically, and basically what it's doing is it's inverting that layer. So I'm going to go ahead and move it down. Well, let's turn these two layers off, and I'm going to move it down somewhere here. All right, now when we turn it on, notice that you don't see it. That's because there's no mask. So let's go ahead here. I'm going to bring this layer above, and now what we need to do is start revealing the cloud in the water. But we want to make sure that we don't do it. We only need just kind of like a subtle taste that the cloud is there. So we'll go back to this main layer right here. We'll take our masking brush just like before. I'm going to turn on the perfect brush, and I'm going to set the opacity of the brush to like 10%. Okay, and then I'm going to make a giant brush size with a kind of smaller feather. And in single strokes, I'm just going to kind of draw through. Now, if you see that it starts drawing onto areas that you don't want, just drop your brush, hit X to change it from paint out to paint in, and just restore that area. No big deal. But here, let's go ahead, let's keep drawing at 10% increments. Now you see, we start to see that cloud. And that's really the most important part. The cloud, and then this kind of area here. So just kind of paint it through really slowly. And bring a little bit of that detail in. So there, that's looking good. That's looking real, right? And of course, you know, one of the things you'll want to do is make sure that if you need to reposition the sky, select that layer. If you want to kind of bring it over a little bit, you can do that. And then of course, you can also clean up the mask. But that's kind of, those are the things that you need to look out for if you're going to mask skies. Because otherwise, you're just doing, you're ruining the, like, to me, obviously, I'm okay with compositing. I really don't care. I don't shoot for a newspaper or a periodical. I don't need to abide by photojournalistic standards. I'm okay with making an image the way I want it. So by that rationale, if I'm giving myself license to replace a sky in a photo like this, then, you know, well, I better make sure that I do what I need to do to make it as realistic as possible. And this is looking really good. You know, so there are plenty of things we can also do because the water is relatively flat. What I can do is go here, for example, go to Effects, add that motion blur, hit Done. And then obviously go back to this layer. Let's turn on the smart layer. We'll go to Effects, and we'll do the exact same thing. Add layer, or add filter, blur, motion, max out, done. And so that's really the power of working layers, is you're able to, especially since we have these smart layers, I can go back and adjust it. But now, because the water is relatively flat, you can get away with that long exposure effect. Of course, if you're really, really looking, the trees themselves are pretty sharp. So, you know, you kind of, depending on how fast the wind was and how fast the clouds are moving, just those are the things to consider. But it's still, you know, available to you. And like, you know, here I'm looking at this and this is bothering me. So I would take my masking brush, make sure I'm set to paint in at a low opacity, with perfect brush turned on, you know, really small brush, and I would kind of start painting those reflections back in. But you'd have to clean it up. You can see how it's just one of those things you have to do, or you have to take time with. So basically, that's what I've got. Mo, anything? Is there a Q&A or anything that I can answer questions with?
You know, you've pretty much covered, answered most of the questions. I'm answering a lot of them here for you as well. We got about 10 minutes left, so if any of the attendees have any questions, feel free to send them on over. You know, otherwise, I think that's pretty much all we have here that I'm seeing.